welcome. My name is Drew Clark, and I'm the founder of the Utah Breakfast Club and of council at Curtin McConkie. Really grateful to see all of you out here today on this rainy March morning. We at the Utah Breakfast Club are focused on enhancing the state's advantages and confronting challenges. And we've had 3 monthly events. This one, in February, we discussed the inversion and solutions. In January, we talked about the digital media industry, and we also had a special event that was aligned with Start SLC. We want to really thank the sponsors of the Utah Breakfast Club, including the Utah Foundation and Beehive Startups. So today, we're going to be talking about making education a priority, confronting or tackling the state's workforce challenges. There's really no issue that excites as much interest among policy folks as well as people in the business community here in Utah about ensuring that we have a solid educational infrastructure. And what we're hoping to do today is bring a lot of different perspectives from the public policy community, from industry, and from universities and supporting organizations that can help us grapple with this tangible issue of ensuring that we have the best educated workforce that we possibly can. I saw several of you last night at an event sponsored by a group called Made in Utah. This is a new organization focused on the digital media industry, and actually kind of gave rise from our very first Utah Breakfast Club event. That's a tangible example of a kind of solution that we'd like to help spur on and to stimulate. So hopefully we'll get some taste of that here. And I think that I left last night's event thinking, isn't this unusual? We've got a group of people saying that there's not enough jobs here in Utah to support the digital media industry. And yet one of the complaints I've been hearing is we have too many jobs here in Utah and we're not training enough talented employees. So it's not necessarily a contradiction, but I wanted to raise that issue to highlight, let's get a specific handle on what the problem is from an industry perspective, from the universities and the policy community. Let me turn first to our first panelist, and let me go ahead and introduce all of them. Stephen Kroes is president of the Utah Foundation and has a deep background in education as well as many policy issues. To his left is Cathy, Donahoe, who is Vice President of Human Resources at Domo, and she'll be able to speak to some of the concrete challenges that the tech industry faces. Michael Savoy is Dean of the College of Tech Computing at Utah Valley University. We're really grateful that he can be here. He's actually been a regular at our Breakfast Club, so thank you, Michael. Teresa Schlegel is Vice President of Human Resources for the School Improvement Network, and we'll look forward to hearing from her about what that is and how it helps the industry. Jeff Weber is Senior Vice President of People and Places. That's a cool title, Jeff, at Instructure, and also look forward to getting an industry perspective from him. And finally, Chase Winder, who's Utah Sales Executive for the Graduation Alliance. So, Stephen, help lay the groundwork for what we're going to be talking about here. Is Utah a leader, a straggler, or somewhere in between when it comes to education?
Well, we used to be a leader. And if you go back 2 or 3 decades, Utah was really outstanding. And so for many, many decades, we were top 5 in the nation for the percentage of our population with a college degree, specifically looking at bachelor's degrees and higher. And in 1970, we were 4th highest in the country. By 1980, we had dropped into the top 10. By 1990, we were only in the top 20, and that's about where we remain right now for the total population, somewhere between 15 and 20 in terms of our ranking for the percent of the population with a degree, and that matters in a lot of ways. I mean, we hear anecdotes from folks doing economic development work that some companies turn away from Utah because they're not sure that they can find enough employees that are educated to the level that they need. And yet we do see our economy is growing well right now. There's a strong mix of employment and things are going well. Tax revenues are up, personal income is up. But in the short run, things look fine, but we have a lot of worries about the long run because of the educational achievement and attainment levels. And thinking about K through 12 as well, we used to be a state that was in the top 10 nationally for school test scores. And so I moved here in 2001, and I was looking at the 1990s test scores, and I was pretty excited about the opportunities for my kids. But then as that decade and a half have gone by, we've seen Utah fall to about the middle of the pack in the country in K through 12 test scores as measured by the National Assessment of Educational Progress. There's a few little areas of rays of hope there, but we're no longer this top performing state.
I really appreciate your breaking out the university and the K through 12 stats there, Steve. On the university one, you might think, oh, well, maybe just the rest of the country is catching up to Utah, right? I mean, it's not as unusual as maybe it was a generation ago for people to get a higher education degree. But when you cite the scores, the test scores, that seems to be the nail in the coffin, right? I mean, what, to the extent you've looked at it, Utah Foundation, is the cause of this decline from the fourth or top 10 to the middle of the pack?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of things. When it comes to higher education, it is a case of the rest of the country catching up with us. And specifically, since 1990, women in America have been really accelerating their educational achievement or attainment levels. And in Utah, that has happened at a much, much slower pace. And so it is just the case now that in Utah, women have caught up with men and exceeded them a little bit in terms of the percent with a degree, where in the rest of the country, women are 10 percentage points ahead of men. And so there's a difference there in genders, but it's not that our education, the percent with a degree has gone down, it's that the percent in the rest of the country has gone up and has exceeded us, but it still matters. I mean, just because they've caught up with us doesn't mean it's less important, because it's a competitive world, and we are competing with other states for jobs. And sometimes it's something as ridiculous as 5 or 6 years ago when the Cheesecake Factory first said, we're not coming to Salt Lake City because there's not enough college graduates in Salt Lake City, and that's our demographic.
At the Cheesecake Factory.
And they finally,
college degree necessary.
And they did come after some time of haggling. I think there were some incentives that were offered to sweeten the economics for them, and they did come to Utah. But everybody was pretty embarrassed at that point that a retail restaurant was not willing to come here because we didn't have enough college grads. But on the K through 12 levels, one of the challenges is we're a much more diverse state than we used to be. And diversity is something that we try to talk about this very carefully, because we're not trying to say that the kids who aren't your traditional white suburban Utahns can't learn as well. What we're saying is more of them come to school with language barriers or poverty barriers or parents who aren't college educated, and it requires extra work from the schools, and we have not risen to that challenge properly in this state in order to deal with educating all of our students to make sure that there's a level playing field for them. There are places that have done it better than Utah. We haven't done it well at all.
And Utah is exceeding other states in diversity in terms of the ethnic mix of population?
No, but we're failing at dealing with it worse than other states. So take Colorado, they're dealing with it quite well. And they had a slide in their rankings and they've gone back to the top 10. We're just not dealing with it very well. And part of that, I think, is resource constraints.
Well, and let's definitely include that in the mix. I was about to say, I'm sure we'll talk about money as a part of it. Do you have any thoughts on the funding levels as we kind of wrap up the legislative session today? Is there any ray of hope in that regard?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot at the foundation. And we've done some work recently on tax burden in the state, and we all pay less in taxes than we used to. And so if you look at now compared to 20 years ago, if you're somebody making $50,000, you're paying $500 less today than you did back then in taxes to state and local government. And if you look at how much you're paying to support the K through 12 schools, you're actually paying $600 less today on a $50,000 income. That means that in order to afford the tax cuts that we've done in the last 20 years, we've taken more than all of it out of the schools. That everything else has been able to grow with the economy and with our incomes, but schools have taken all the hit and a little bit more in order to finance the tax cuts
And
that.
do these grim statistics you're citing even account for the fact that there's a higher, per capita number of students per household?
So when we look at education funding effort, we think the best measure is funding as a percent of our income. And so that kind of accounts for everything. Over time, it accounts for inflation, it accounts for rising incomes. It's a measure of affordability, really. As a state that has more kids than other states, that's the reason why we have the lowest per pupil funding in the nation. And it hasn't always been the lowest, but since the late 80s, it's been the lowest. And but we used to have this paradox that we were the lowest in per pupil funding, but we were one of the highest in terms of the effort that we put into it, the percent of our incomes that we put into it. We're no longer high in the effort. We're ranked in the 30s now.
Well, a great summary, albeit sobering and not very pretty. Cathy, how do these statistics impact you on a day-to-day level? What's the workforce perspective that Domo brings to this issue?
Well, we're obviously very fast-growing. I would say not startup anymore, but emerging company. We're 600 employees now. We've grown year over year. The last 3 years, 100% headcount growth, and that means we hired about 250 people last year. And it is a challenge. We have a challenge we have a very robust intern program that is primarily fed through BYU and through UVU. And a lot of those students actually are from out of state. And so they don't necessarily want to stay in Utah after they finish their degree program. They want to go back home, or they want to go to Silicon Valley. So, we've got that challenge with our intern program that as we're building our own workforce through that program, how do we retain them and keep them competing with Silicon Valley? If we look at the more senior technical jobs that we're trying to fill, there's just not enough people in the state of Utah that have that background. I just see it as purely supply and demand economics. And, it's kind of like it was in, probably 99, 2000 when, before the bubble burst, and an engineer could walk out the door and have 5 job offers. Jeff Weber, my esteemed colleague down there, shaking his head. It's really that ridiculously hard out there. We have engineers that I've never, in the course of being in Utah now 18 years, that I've had to deal with so many counteroffers on a weekly basis that employees are not even looking for a job, but they're getting headhunted from local companies, but also companies in the Bay Area, Apple, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, that they've got enough critical mass now in those companies that they actually don't care if these folks stay in Utah. And they're going to get Google benefits, Google Pay, and they can stay right here. So we've had to make a much more significant investment in our benefit programs to remain competitive so that we don't lose them.
Well, Cathy, couldn't this just be seen as an issue of money? I mean, are firms like yours and others willing to pay the price you need to pay to get the most talented people?
Yeah, you have to. So we have to offer Silicon Valley benefits. I benchmark our benefits, not to Utah, quite honestly, but to Silicon Valley. And we benchmark our pay, especially for senior engineers, principal engineers.
Could you pull the microphone down a little bit towards you there?
Data scientists, architects, that level. It's almost over, I've seen in the last decade, that those pay scales have really started to align where executives have been for the last 15, 20 years, where it's definitely more national. It's not those local geographical pays that you have in your local market like you do for your entry level, right out of school staff support, administrative types of roles. When you look to go get a CTO, that person can go work anywhere. So the pay has to be pretty comparable.
Right.
And we're finding that that's now how it is with senior technical folks.
So when you hear a summary of the educational problems or challenges that the state faces, such as Stephen just gave, what of that is most concerning to you? Which part of that is
It's really the supply and demand, and I think, as the task force that Teresa and Jeff and I have been on with Rich Nelson in the UTC, and we pulled together some of the universities and talked about all the open positions that we had, did a survey with UTC what we found was where the educational institutions are getting their data is from the Department of Workforce Services for the number of tech jobs open. Well, when you've got 3% unemployment statewide and less than 3% unemployment nationally and globally for technology, that means we have a shortage of talent. And none of those people are going to DWS. They don't even know what DWS is. And so, you know, DWS, I think, threw out numbers like, what wasn't a couple hundred job openings that were, that they showed for technology this year. And Jeff and Teresa and I all kind of looked at each other and went, we named 5 companies and added up 400 jobs. So we did a survey where only 10% of the UTC technology companies responded, and it was the number that came back of open technology jobs was over 1,700. Did not include Hill Air Force Base, which had about 1,000 jobs over 3 years. So let's just round up and say it was 2,000. I mean, they had a tenth.
Right.
So it was an aha moment for us that, well, no wonder the educational institutions don't know, they're getting the wrong data. So let's partner with you and get you the right data.
So how do you recruit in a situation like this? You must have to bring in people from out of state, right?
We do.
Where do you advertise? How do you kind of go about it?
Everywhere.
Yeah.
We've gone social recruiting. We've started to look at recruiting in not recruitment like you think of, like going down to the Army office to get recruited, but we're treating it as what I call talent acquisition marketing. We target certain areas, certain jobs. We've started attending MIT, Berkeley, Stanford for those career fairs to bring in very specific talent for things like data scientists, because we just don't have very few of those, I guess you would say, here in Utah, and it's definitely Mecca, you know, in Silicon Valley and certain areas that have that kind of talent where they're not necessarily a computer scientist, but it's, you know, statistical analysis, and that's so much of what's driving now software.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's turn to Michael. Michael, you're no stranger to this issue. Let me start off with the question that for you, though, which is, what do we need to do to get the reputation out there that if you want a tech job, don't go to Silicon Valley, come to Utah?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily don't go to Silicon Valley, but I think what we're doing is we're spending a lot of time and effort in conjunction with the universities and the business partners in terms of marketing and recruiting nationwide. You know, like Cathy just said, I mean, it's to get talent into the state, we need to be recruiting the talent. They need to understand the diversity of the state, the attractiveness of the state. You know, we talked just a minute ago about some of the educational issues in the state. When you start recruiting high-tech people, education becomes an absolutely critical component of that. And that's K to 20. It's not K-12. It's not higher ed. It's a combination of all of that. And so we really have worked very hard to create these programs that allow us to go out and really recruit on a competitive level at the national level in terms of the education infrastructure in the state. We do have some weaknesses, and we do have some things that we need to overcome, but things like the K-16 Alliance that UVU has created are designed to start making those changes and start to create an environment in which education is now an attraction rather than a deterrent to companies coming in.
Break it down into short-term and medium or long-term things that the state could do to ameliorate this problem we've been talking about.
Short-term, and I'll talk a little bit about UVU, so that's where I'm at, and I like to brag about my college. So, but in TNC, one of the things, TNC is technology and computing, and I'm the dean of that college. And one of the things that we've created are what are called stackable degree programs. So to me, one of the biggest tragedies out there is someone who goes to college and earns 100 credit hours towards a 4-year degree and then gets hired by one of my esteemed colleagues up here right before they finish their degree because the talent need is there, and these students have the talent, they can step in and be productive. So we're achieving everything we want to achieve except one thing, and that is that student leaves, and in every survey, everywhere, it says that they have some college, but not a college degree. And that's a problem. And it's a recruiting problem for us, it's an image problem for us. But the student is very talented, they're capable of doing the work, so they're out there working. So one of the things we've done is create what are called stackable degree programs. Now, when a student comes to UVU to pursue a bachelor's degree in computer science or in information systems or digital media, in as little as 12 credit hours, they're earning a certificate. So they'll get a certificate of completion, and it may be for Photoshop, or it might be for Python programming, or whatever's needed, or Ruby on Rails, Jeff. Okay. So it might be in something like that. And then as they progress through their degree, now understand, this is not taking extra courses. They can take extra courses and earn additional certificates. But as they progress through their degree, they're earning certificates. They earn an associate's degree after 63 hours. They earn additional certificates as they pursue their bachelor's. And then ultimately they earn their bachelor's degree. So the reason we've done that is to start to address this issue of, well, we have all these people who have, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the numbers, but Provo-Orem is the #1 city in the nation, or #1 area in the nation for people with some college but not a college degree. And people, you know, when we first got that number at the university, it was brought to us as a huge negative. And they said, look how awful this is. And I went, well, actually, that's pretty good. Because it also means we're the #1 place in the nation for people with some college. And they kind of went, well, we never looked at it like that. I said, so the issue for us then becomes, how do we finish those degrees? And what constitutes a degree? So when we start looking short, medium, and long term, we start to get into the issue of skills versus degrees. And there's been a lot of discussions at UTC, and I'm on public policy as well as the board and the talent shortage committee, which I never get to attend. But you know, we have had this discussion of what is it that we're trying to accomplish here. And is it that we want people with college degrees, which is fine, then I've got to tell my colleagues up here to stop hiring my students before they graduate, which is not going to work because they need the talent. The other thing is, well, do we then sit there and go, well, college degrees don't matter? And so now all we care about is skills. Well, that's self-defeating, back to what you brought up, because then we look nationwide, people look at us and they go, wow, nobody has a college degree in Utah. So we don't want to go there. But the reality is that we have to combine the two and really have to work towards this idea of skills and degrees. And so short-term skill sets, intern to full-time hire programs, programs where we transition students from full-time student and part-time employee to full-time employee and part-time student, on-site education. So for us to go to Domo, to go to instructor, to go to the different companies and be able to sit there and say, look, we will bring the classes to you. You don't have to bring the students to us anymore. And that
do you do that right now?
We do that right now. Yeah, we're teaching at Adobe, we're teaching at Exactware, at Bluehost. We have a number of different companies we're teaching at, and we'll go anywhere where the need is. I mean, as educational institutions, we have to fundamentally transform the way we're doing business.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion lately in the national media about this issue of skills versus degrees, and the Tech Hire program announced by the White House on Monday of this week talked about, you know, the 5 million jobs open today, more than any point since the bubble, 2001. And that 500,000 of these job openings are in the IT, software development, network administration. And so the Tech Hire program just announced, in which Salt Lake City announced it was participating, is designed to help develop the multi-sector collaboration to bring people without traditional degrees into these jobs. Just wondering if you or any member of the panel has any thoughts on that program or those like it.
Well, I'll turn it over to everybody else. Just very quickly from our standpoint, higher education has become fundamentally disconnected from the needs of the industry. Mm-hmm. We're graduating people. Our alignment of, if you look at most institutions in the United States, the #1 degree in the United States right now is psychology. The fastest growing degree in the United States higher education is psychology. The lowest need of any BS 4-year degree in the United States right now is psychology. Okay, so you know we have a fundamental disconnect in the way we're educating students in the United States and the needs of the industry sectors. Now, that does not mean that we need to get rid of psychology, so please don't misunderstand. But it does mean that we need to better educate and better inform parents, students, teachers, guidance counselors into where the programs are and where the needs are. The announcement from the White House is an attempt to sit there and say, look, we have this fundamental disconnect, and we're willing to put money towards trying to solve this problem, but we can't just simply put money and go after it the same way we've gone after it for the last 20 years, because that's not going to solve the problem.
That's a great perspective. Teresa, why don't you tell us a little bit about the School Improvement Network and how you approach this point that's just been made, very dramatic one, about education not really serving the needs of the economy today.
Thank you, Drew. So School Improvement Network is truly a school improvement company. We have, we represent right now 1.2 million teachers that use our product. We're in over 9,600 schools, and we're in all 50 states, and we've gone internationally. So it's just a little bit about our company. Our motivator and our cause really is quite simple, but maybe more difficult to achieve, is 100% of students being ready for career, college, or lifelong learning and success, okay? So when we look at the demographics in the United States, here in Utah, when we were working with teachers, when working with districts, states, and also schools individually as well, we see that there is a real disconnect from the college graduates, from K-12, from high school graduates, compared to what we need here in industry. So for instance, one of the dialogues we've been having more recently is the knowledge acquisition that you have when you leave high school, or the knowledge acquisition that you have when you leave college. Does that knowledge really help you be successful? And one of the things that we found out is that we really need to look at how to integrate students more quickly into business. For instance, with us, we get a college graduate, but we still spend a significant amount of time teaching them to communicate, work together as a team, and get them ready to really be a participant in business. So they've got the knowledge base, but we need to still help them. In addition to that, I was really lucky to be asked to work on a UTC task force with Jeff and with Cathy, and we got together and tried to address the issue of whether or not there really was a disconnect from education and our business needs. And as Cathy had mentioned earlier, there truly was. One of the things that we found out in an engineering survey, and if you don't mind, I've got some statistics here because I didn't want to misrepresent it, is the number of software development engineering jobs in 2014, companies employed 8,182 software developers and engineers versus 4,703 in 2013. Okay, that's a significant increase. 75% were paid between $75,000 and $105,000. Think about that for a moment. Current openings were over 1,105 openings within the 40 companies, and 527 of those were for software developers and engineers. So again, that's just quite a bit different than what the statistics were coming from the workforce services. And then in 2015, the hiring plans, 72% said they plan to increase their employee count in the next 12 months, including 1,845 open technology positions. Okay. And then the difficulty of filling jobs, 70% of those 40 companies said they had difficulty finding enough qualified candidates from Utah engineering or technical schools, compared to 49% that said the same thing in 2013. So this really shows that there is some significant issues that we have a challenge in facing. One of the things from School Improvement Network, as we started to really ramp up and expand our business, as we've been one of the 50 fastest growing companies in Utah year over year, was finding that talent and that need. And we really are working hard to keep jobs here in Utah. One of the things that we did have to do was to go to Asia and open up a software development group in Asia because we couldn't find the talent here. And we have been working very closely with 3 different local universities in the Philippines in order for us to really try to get the students educated on our stack and develop that talent pool. We want to take that methodology that we've used in the Philippines that's been quite successful and bring it back to Utah. And so we've started a program now in where we're reaching out to the universities, trying to find out what it is we can do to partner with them and help educate them on what the business needs are, so that when students come out, they're more ready to get to work.
Teresa, what's the best case scenario for how the School Improvement Network or a company like yours could help a university, for example, to tailor their degrees or their educational offerings to more meet the needs of the industries?
Well, I think because we have specialty in the knowledge base since 1991, we've been in business, I think what we could do is really partner with universities and just, to be honest with you, is to educate them on what our needs are and the growth and the projections and some of the challenges, and then work with them one-on-one to help, come up with a collective effort on how to change the education system.
Right, but when they get it, what do you do to help them? How does the effort change as a result of working with the university, for example?
Okay, could you please restate that?
Yeah, how would you like to see universities adapt?
Oh, okay, thank you. Actually, for instance, it would be nice to have more of a partnership with universities where they understand our stacks and they can actually tailor their programs to meet our needs so that as students are going through their program, that they're actually employable by us. We're looking at, developing some internship programs locally as well to help with that. So that's some of the partnerships. We'd like to have that outcome.
Okay. Well, Jeff Weber, tell us a little bit about your perspective on this. Cathy's laid out some of the perspectives from Domo. Tell us about InStructure and some of your needs in this area.
Yeah, I think they are fairly represented by both Teresa and Cathy and what they've talked about already. InStructure is all about transforming the online education experience for K through 12 students, higher ed students, and now into the corporate workforce with our Canvas and Bridge products. We've been growing rapidly as well and hiring a lot of people in the last couple of years. This last year, we grew by about 275 employees. We'll probably grow by another 250 employees this year. And our single biggest challenge that threatens the growth of our company is finding the talent we need. So it's significant for us. In the last year, for example, we needed to hire roughly 50 software engineers. We had to hire 20 of those outside of the state of Utah because we couldn't find enough in Utah, which means that we now have to have remote engineers working in random places around the country where we can find talent. What this is doing to us and other companies we talk to in the area here, and all of us are sharing and filling the same stories, is that our costs are dramatically increasing for labor and for the software engineers we're hiring. We're in continual talent wars to try to retain and engage the people we have because they're getting multiple offers on a regular basis. And so therefore, the throughput coming out of higher ed is not big enough for us. So not only do we need more engineers with the skills that we're looking for, but they don't have specifically the background experience that we need. So we've had to go out and hire people from dev boot camps or other institutions where they go through follow-on training specifically in the areas we need. For example, for us, it's Ruby on Rails as our back-end programming language. So that creates additional challenges for us. So there's a few maybe ad hoc stories I could share. So this isn't just a Utah problem that's happening nationally, but it's impacting us here because, as Cathy indicated, national companies are willing to pay employees in Utah national or Bay Area wages, which also escalates our costs. We had a small engineering shop we found in Columbus, Ohio that was getting cut off from their national firm. They had 9 engineers there. We made each of those 9 engineers offers at 10% higher than they're currently making with a $25,000 sign-on bonus. We landed one of them. Each of them had 5 to 7 offers in Columbus, Ohio, which is a mecca, apparently, of engineering talent.
You know that, did you?
We have a mobile team of engineers that if they don't get a 10% increase every 6 months, they're looking for other jobs. This is the kind of challenge we're dealing with. We have, I mentioned the dev boot camp situations. We have been training people internally on specific skill coding experiences we think they need. So our engineers became talented at training other engineers. So of course, we just had one resign this week because he set up his own dev boot camp. He has $60,000 in bookings for next month with people going through his courses already on his own. These are the kind of things we're dealing with. This is crazy as far as the experiences we're seeing right now, and it's really impacting our ability to grow. So those are some of the ad hoc stories.
Is the dev boot camp concept, is that like a short-term bridge, or how would you like to see that incorporated into the university environment?
Well, what's happening is this meeting need that's not being met, right? So a 9-week course to become a Ruby on Rails certified engineer, because they're not getting it in their college education, and students are graduating or not graduating, as Michael indicated, and going and taking the dev boot camp because they're more employable after getting that certification than they are with a 4-year degree from a learning institution.
And they can make 80 to 90,000 a year. And they make 80 to 90,000 a year.
Yeah, with a less than a 4-year degree and a certification from dev boot camp, they can make 80K.
Michael, what is your thought on the dev boot camp concept? And I mean, how are universities adapting to that threat, if you will?
I'm pretty sure I'm going to sign up for the one on Ruby on Rails here. No, I think that what you're hearing is exactly the problem we're facing, and that is the short, medium, and long term. We need to solve a short-term talent shortage but we need to do it in such a way that we maintain long-term sustainability. And so that's going to take, as you've heard everyone up here talk about, it's going to take a restructuring of education, the way we educate, the way we interface our educational institutions with business, the relationship between the business entities and the educational institutions. You know, we talked about this, you know, the state funds about 47% of higher education costs in the state of Utah. Now, most people would go, wow, that's terrible. No, that's actually really, really good. I came from Texas. I was at the University of Texas at Dallas. The state funds 9% of our higher education costs at UT Dallas. The rest of it comes through grants, through business partnerships, and through tuition. And so we're in a situation where we need to recognize that there is an immediate need for skills, as Jeff just brought up. If a student can leave a university and go do a 9-week boot camp and make $80,000 a year, that's fantastic. That's short term, that's wonderful. We're not going to get those kids. There's no way I can explain to that person they need to stay in college at that point. However, long term, as these companies mature and they start to need middle and upper middle management, they need upper management talent, those degrees are going to become very important. And so we need to create a process that allows those people to have lifelong learning and continue to come back to universities when it's appropriate and when those degrees are
Excellent point. I really want to ask, before we turn to Chase, Stephen, what do you think about what you've been hearing here about this issue that the industry and universities are facing on this type of education?
Well, it's interesting that so many people have mentioned Utah Technology Council, because I ran into Rich Nelson yesterday walking outside of the Capitol and asked him what was new and interesting. And the thing that he mentioned was that workforce services is dramatically underestimating the need for tech jobs. And we have looked at that in the past, and we've seen they have some immediate projections and some long-term projections of where the job openings will be. And it's very hard for them to do that accurately. And they have a whole bunch of reasons why, but it needs to improve when they think that there are only a few hundred openings. It seems like the institutions of higher education maybe need to bypass that data and go straight to industry to understand what the openings are going to be and what the capacity needs to be. So, you know, I think this issue about measuring skills in addition to degrees is important, but I don't know how it can be done in a comprehensive way. And we deal with a lot of statistics at the foundation, and so when we're looking at our competitiveness compared to other states, it's hard to come up with a number that says, maybe we don't have all the degrees, but we've got a lot of skills. I wish there were a way to quantify that. But anyway, you know, we are hearing conflicting things about the tightness of the labor force. I think in the tech industry, you're hearing a lot of evidence about the tightness right here. What we hear from other economists is that there's still a lot of people who dropped out of the labor force, so 3.5% unemployment is not the same as it would have been 10 years ago. There are a lot of people who just aren't counted as unemployed because they dropped out of the labor force, but they will come back as jobs increase. And Utah did have one of the larger reductions in labor force participation during the Great Recession. So we hope that there's some slack there where people will come back into the labor force, but it sounds like, particularly in the tech industry, it doesn't look like there is.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's turn to Chase. Tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do at the Graduation Alliance.
Yeah, thank you. So we're coming at this problem from a little bit of a different angle. Graduation Alliance is a national company working in 12 states right now with thousands of high school dropout students. And we help them overcome those social, emotional barriers that have led them to leave public education, whether it's being chronically ill, whether it's taking care of family members, bullied, emotional issues, teen pregnancy. And we work with districts and charters to help develop an individualized plan based around technology access to curriculum, but with a support team of tutors and mentors and coaches, and a whole wraparound support team that most of these students have never really had in their own personal and family lives to give them the confidence that they need to succeed. And so when we're looking at a lot of these unfilled jobs and a lot of the talent issues, I think we're looking at this from the current inputs into the system of, you know, K-20 education and the outputs out. But what we're seeing nationally is that there is a whole wealth of talent out there that's not being tapped. Nationwide, there's 35 million people without a high school diploma. Right here in Utah, it has been improving over the last few years, the graduation rate, but it's still about annually 6,000 students we're losing per year. And cumulatively, right now, that means we have about 185,000 adults in the state of Utah without a high school diploma. And so our company's focus is actually in helping find these students and offering them a second chance to get the education and career opportunities they need to advance their lives, because this is a significant economic problem. Columbia University predicted in 2006 report that each dropout can cost the state up to $500,000 in lifetime costs from lower earnings, lower taxes, more incarceration, more public health care costs. And certainly these folks are not going on to higher education. They're not going into certificate training. And so when we're looking at this talent pyramid, we're trying to help fill those entry-level and those mid-skill jobs by getting a student back with a high school diploma, with a pathway to post-secondary, traditionally maybe junior colleges, community colleges, and two-year certificate programs, because where we're seeing a need in industry has really been at that customer service level to support a lot of the technology companies. You know, and that's been at Discover, American Express, 1-800-CONTACTS. There are tens of thousands of call center and customer support jobs that support the technology-facing companies in the state. And they here too are saying, we have needs that are going unmet from a perspective of, you know, there's just not enough students with the skills, whether they're communications, they're critical thinking. They're certainly not on the engineering and software development side, but they're also having a very expensive process that's driving up costs, competing with them. And we know of several companies who are moving hundreds of jobs to other states and opening up new call centers because they can't find that talent here.
Teresa.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that a little bit. Thank you. Again, I'm kind of a statistic guru here. The BLS government did a study, and this is just
BLS?
BLS.
Bureau of Labor Statistics?
Yes, thank you. Did a study on earnings, and so I wanted to add to that, Chase, because they said a non-graduate student's average will be about $24,000 a year. High school graduate, 33.3. An associate or some college average would be 38.5, and a bachelor's is 60. So when you take that times 185,000 that are non-graduates right now, that is an economic condition that needs to be considered.
Chase, what's your thoughts about the increasing discussion about apprenticeship programs in the national educational landscape?
Yeah, certainly. You know, we really believe that there is the pathways is a real solution, and where we're actually working right now as a company is to embed curriculum, pathway, and training into our own curriculum and delivery of that instruction so that they are employable upon day one. Since we're a private company, we actually have the ability to work directly with industry to say, you know, what is your needs? What is the exact skills and knowledge that a student needs to enter upon day one so that they're not the onboarding costs, the recruiting costs, the talent acquisition costs, but it's saying, you know, we can have a direct-to-employer pipeline of this untapped talent potential where we can start plugging in apprenticeships, work-based learning opportunities, embedded curriculum, and we're finding, you know, a really exciting response to that from Utah companies.
Go ahead, Teresa, yeah.
Chase, aren't you also focusing on life skills and communication and work readiness as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. You know, we really want to make sure that resiliency and critical thinking and those life skills are a comprehensive part of our program, which sometimes can get lost, I think, you know, in traditional curriculum, as it's already been mentioned, that, you know, once they get to a company, they have to go back and retrain some of those skills that weren't. So we have a comprehensive integrated plan called the Workforce Diploma, where we are taking a student from a dropout through a high school diploma, through skills training, directly to employer's doorstep, ready to work in those entry and middle skill level jobs so that they can go on later to go back and get the training they need if they want to be more of a mid-level manager or a developer.
Stephen and Michael, tell me your thoughts on this approach. How do we deal with this end of the market, so to speak, that is having problems with even completing high school?
Well, I would say, Chase and I were talking before the meeting started, and a couple years ago, a year and a half ago, we did a study on what states that are like Utah are doing to succeed academically. And these include states like Colorado and Minnesota and Montana and a couple of other small states. But Minnesota and Colorado are great examples, plus some states like Massachusetts and New Jersey that are just amazing. They spend a lot of money, but they have great outcomes. And one of the things that they had in common was a strong focus on interventions in high school for two reasons. One, to encourage application and to college and future attendance at college, and the other was to reduce dropouts. And some of them are using private organizations like Chase's company, and they are finding success in bringing in these organizations to help reduce their dropout rate. We've seen the same kind of numbers that Teresa was citing about the reduced incomes for those who don't finish school. And it is a huge concern. I mean, when we look at a lot of economic stats at Utah Foundation, and when one of the biggest concerns nationally these days is how the median income has not grown, or median household income hasn't grown in the nation for maybe 20 years. And part of this is the increasing proportion of our population that doesn't have the skills that they need. So it's certainly a high priority need.
Mm-hmm. Michael.
And I'll add to that, we are partnered, UVU is partnering with Graduation Alliance, because one of the issues that you hear us talking about up here is the pipeline, right? And in order to fill the pipeline, in order for us to graduate them, we got to get them into the programs to begin with. And so for us, in higher education, we have to reach down into K-12. And that doesn't mean reaching down into the 12th graders, 11th graders, 10th graders. It means reaching down into the elementary schools, into the pre-K programs, and working to create programs that allow the pipeline to continue to be filled. And the education is not just for the student, the education also needs to be for the parents. Parents need to understand, and the statistics that are quoted are great statistics, and they're very important. But when you stratify the statistics, there are some differences there. So for instance, we have a program called ERT, Electronics, Automation, Robotics, Technology. It's a 2-year program. They get an associate's degree in ERT when they graduate. The starting salary there is $60,000 to $100,000 a year. We have 100% placement of our students. They have to finish the program before they go into the workforce. So there are programs like that that are all over the place where we can go to these students who have dropped out of high school, to these adult learners who maybe don't like education, and there are a lot of them, to learners who maybe look at a university and it's intimidating to go to a university, those who financially are not able to commit to a 4-year degree, and we're able to create these programs that allow them to step out at various points. The reason for doing that is, once again, to fill the pipeline with these people that are out there. I mean, it is the greatest tragedy in the world that we've got 185,000 high school dropouts, right, that are out there, and we have to get them employed. We have 5,000, and I'll use the number, right? 5,000. Yeah, I like that number. We have 5,000 unfilled engineering and technology jobs in the state of Utah. Yet, for some reason, we can't match everybody up. And we have got to solve that problem, and that's not a problem that will be solved by government. It's not one that will be solved by higher education or business. It's one that's going to be solved by all of us working together.
Let's make sure to invite your questions. If you'd like to ask something of our panel, raise your hand, and if you don't mind coming on down here, because the microphone won't go all that way, but let's go ahead and get this questioner and others in as we continue our discussion.
There's a adage in computers, garbage in, garbage out. And it does seem to me that the fundamental problem you're talking about is the salaries we pay teachers. A science or math teacher lasts about 3 years, and then they go off to get a better job. I don't see industry in Utah, particularly with the legislature, supporting salary increases, meaningful salary increases that people could live off. Why not? And I'm Pat Shea.
Go ahead and just identify your name.
I'm a lawyer and a research professor of biology at the University of Utah.
It's Cathy, Jeff, do you want to address that question?
Nobody wants to answer that question. The reality is that if you're going to play a basketball player $22 million a year to play basketball, and you're going to pay a high school teacher $12,000 a year to teach high school, you get what you pay for. All right? The reality is that until we as a society decide that education is important and we're willing to pay for it, we're going to continue to have this problem.
But Michael, why is it not just a market determination? I mean, there is a market demand for basketball players who are skillful.
Absolutely.
But
I think what you're hearing is that there's a market demand for high school teachers who have really good computer science. They're hired by these guys, right? We can't compete with, if you take a high school teacher right now in the state of Utah, and I just finished this, looking at this, a high school teacher in the state of Utah who has a computer science certification will make double to triple their salary in private industry than they will by teaching in high school. At the flip side of that, we go to the companies and we go, hey, you've got great talented people, can they come teach in the high school? And the answer is no, because they don't have a teaching certificate. Now, is it important to have a teaching certificate? Yes, because quite honestly, I teach college kids. I would go crazy if I had to teach fifth graders, okay? To be quite honest with you, I don't know how to teach a fifth grader. I know how to teach college students. So we do need to do some of that training, but it highlights the fundamental disconnect between the education that we're providing and the business needs and the economic needs of the state. And that is a very difficult question. I mean, your question is to the heart of the problem, and it's going to take all of us working together to solve that problem.
Steve wants to weigh in on this.
So Drew, you asked about demand and salaries, and one of the functions of government is to aggregate demand into a way that it can pay for the supply. So I have a demand for education for my children, and I don't know how to put an exact price tag on that, but government pools my demand with the demand of all the other parents in this state, and we pool our resources together through taxes, but then the process of setting salaries and something like that becomes a political process, because I can't dictate how much my children's teachers are paid, because my demand has been aggregated with thousands of other people. So we have to have political processes to set those. And I do worry that our policies that relate to economic development in this state haven't quite turned the corner away from focusing on low costs to the future focus that will be needed of focusing on quality.
That's a good point.
And so we have two ways of doing economic development in the state, and the thing that the agencies do, the recruiting companies and offering incentives and stuff, that's going well. But the policies that we set that create the macro environment for economic development, we're still focused on policies that are probably 1970 policies. These are policies that focus on keeping costs low. And part of keeping costs low, Utah is a low-cost leader in terms of labor costs and land costs and low regulatory burdens and all this stuff. But if we focus so much on keeping costs low, which is our past strategy, and it's working in the present, but it probably doesn't work in the future. If we focus too much on keeping costs low, then we keep taxes low to the extent that we can't afford the investment in quality. And maybe the regulatory burdens relate to quality as well when you think about air quality and quality of life that will attract workers here. So if we're so focused on keeping costs down that we can't afford the money because we've reduced our investment in education, we can't afford the money to pay for quality teachers to educate kids, something's broken in the political process, and it needs to change.
Well, thanks for that perspective. Kathy, Jeff, do you want to respond to the questioner?
I'd only add one more component. I absolutely agree with what Pat's saying. What's happening, we've seen in industry is over time, Utah has not paid executives or other positions compared to other states. That's changing because we have to, and so industry is paying executives and employees more in line with national averages now. We have not yet done that with education. So we are underpaying our educators in this state compared to other states. They will either leave and go work elsewhere, or we need to increase our wages to match what other people are paying. If we don't go there, we'll lose good people in the state.
Okay.
I mean, I agree completely with Jeff. We just recently hired someone who was teaching at the high school level I think he was making about $50,000 a year. We're paying him 75. He has some front-end web development experience. It was a steal for us, honestly. We were happy to hire him. So, I mean, that is a real...
It's happening, is what you're saying.
It's happening.
The wages are rising. Michael and then Teresa.
And I was just gonna address just very quickly. I don't want the implication of what we're talking about up here to be that, hey, we need to go out and raise taxes and pay teachers more money. That is not going to solve the problem. The problem is going to be addressed by us getting together and figuring out what's the best way to educate these kids. And there are some fundamental changes that need to occur. Education is disaggregating, similar to what you've seen in healthcare over the last several years. It's now happening in education. And if we don't, as a state and as a community, start to address these issues, it's not simply about throwing dollars. That is not the answer. But there are some creative ways to do this. But as a community, we're going to have to be willing to step up and say, we may have to pay a little bit more here. We may have to do a little bit changes over here. There's a lot of different scenarios that come into play here. But Jeff's absolutely right. If we can't get to where we have qualified teachers in the classroom, then we're going to have a problem. And I'll use myself as a great example. You know, my brother and I started a company. We grew it. We ended up merging it and doing a couple other things, and finally ended up selling it. That's what allows me to be in education. Okay? Trust me, they're not paying me the kind of salary that would justify me being a dean. Right? I can tell you that up front. It's ridiculous. Right? But I can do that because I was a successful business person, and now I've turned my attention to education. And that's what we're going to have to take. It's going to take more people like that. It's going to take more recognition of, if you want qualified people in the classroom, then you're going to have to pay them to be in the classroom. And we have to come up with a way of compensating those people that makes sense.
Teresa.
Yeah, that's pretty much the line I was going to head down as well. But I also wanted to say that what we find at School Improvement Network is the teachers that are most effective and most efficient are those who really love it. It's not because of the pay. And we also hire teachers and we hire principals, and we bring them in to do implementation, training, and working with our client base. And that's what they said, that at a certain point in time that they recognize in their career growth, even though they love and they have a passion for teaching and educating, that sometimes the pay isn't there, and so they have to move.
Yeah. Other questions that we have? Yes.
Hi, I'm Linda Simmons, and Steve indicated that over the last 20 or 30 years, that the other sectors of our society have done well with the legislature, but the tax cuts have all come from education. Now, all of you are in the industry, and you know that that's what, where maybe the pressure has to come. I'm a former educator, and I know that those teachers who are good care a lot, and they're doing it in spite of the pay, not because of it, but in spite of it. And they find other ways to make ends meet, either to work or they do all kinds of things. But I do believe that education is the most important part of our society, because without it, we have no future. And you've all indicated that perhaps at this point we need to readjust, but it seems a shame that the only way you were able to come back to education was because you sold a company and you had enough money. And Pat, who's sitting next to me, is an attorney who also now is up at the university, and he said, but the pay isn't nearly as good. Now, I know that the problem with education is that it comes out of public coffers. And because we have so many students in Utah, so many kids, that it takes a very large portion of the budget, and we all know that. But since 1994, as Steve said, through 2 cuts in property taxes, 1 cut in income tax, making it a flat tax, and then taking part of public education's money and giving it to higher ed, has reduced the resources. And in reality, without resources, we're in a technological age, and where the kids need iPads, they need all this technical stuff to work within the class, and they have great ways to use them, but especially our rural districts couldn't afford that. I happen to be from Park City, and we do very well. Every student has an iPad, and you know, technology is very well supported. But that isn't true with all of Utah, and even within the in Salt Lake area, it's not necessarily true. But there are so many facets of education. But I think that industry is maybe the secret, because maybe you're the ones who have to put the pressure on the legislators to make education a priority, because instead of, with a decline in funding, they have also increased specialization and special projects and pet projects. This year, there were 160 bills in public education, which would indicate, and this is not uncommon. This has gone on year after year, trying to change things. But what I'm asking for maybe is for you to see what you can do to put some pressure to increase the funding for education.
Well, let's actually also address the issue of the technologies that are being used. How important is that in the mix of greater salaries for teachers and use of technology in education?
Thank you for those comments, because that's why Jeff and Teresa and I are here. We see it. We see that, first of all, it is that pipeline, right, that's been shared, but it's also other things that we're seeing. We're seeing, you know, I would say generally under 30 years old, folks coming out of the public education system do not have the written communication skills, often the verbal communication skills. I'm a transplant from Southern California. I moved here 18 years ago, and when I did, I had a daughter that was married, a daughter that was going to UVU, and two that were in high school. And the high school senior, when we moved here, Lone Peak wasn't open yet, so she went to American Fork High School. She enrolled in statistics. She was the only girl in the statistics class, and they had just started offering statistics. And the girls kind of made fun of her. We let her go back to California and finish her senior year. I know it's getting better, but I think a lot of the things Steve said about where Utah was at the top in the 70s, it's not anymore. And that's the reality. That was kind of a shock for me to see that. I felt like we had taken a step back 20 years. And I look at the students that we are bringing, a lot of them even coming out of some of the universities. You know, everyone thinks that you can communicate the way you do on a text. That doesn't work in a business email that we're asking someone who comes out of school with a non-technical degree, let's say business administration or psychology, right? I actually have a daughter that's a psychology graduate. She now has 4 kids. My husband says we have a philosophy degree and a psychology degree, and between the two of them, they have 9 kids. I said, well, they'll be great moms. But, you know, the reality is that they don't know how to write well. And so we've been discussing, and with other HR folks, that how we're going to have to create those programs within our business so that they have those skills that allow them to remain employed and be promoted.
Well, what do panelists think about the role of technology, of tools? I mean, there was obviously, late Speaker Lockhart had a significant bill last year for technology education. Chase, do you want to address this?
Yeah, definitely. And as a Utah Technology Council, we have been able to support several initiatives. One was actually to support increased pay for those engineering teachers in K-12, as well as also support an engineering initiative in higher education to specifically address those talent needs. But in addition to that, Utah has, with limited funding and pilot projects, led the nation. We have the only 2 A ratings back-to-back by the Digital Learning Now report card, along with Florida, for our investments in technology. We have one of the leading broadband infrastructures for K through 20 in the country, as well as we've had successful pilot programs for pre-kindergarten software to prepare at-risk students to enter kindergarten at grade level. We've had successful programs for English language learning software in our Title I schools that are really helping teachers get students English proficient quicker and more effectively. And we've also made significant investments in a STEM Action Center, which has been leading the way with 300,000 licenses for math software. which are showing in empirical results 1.8 effect size growth versus control groups, which is almost off the charts. And these students are being able to use these at home. Teachers are being able to see specifically what intervention students need on a day-to-day basis, and students are getting very individualized and personalized instruction throughout the day, with teachers being able to elevate their conversations to critical thinking besides just content delivery. And so Utah has been a leader and is continuing to be a leader with small investments that are paying huge dividends.
Oh, thank you for that perspective. It's good to hear a little bit of good news here. I want to ask the panel, sort of, this discussion can be distilled in some ways to three questions that I'd ask each of you. You know, what do you say to a high school student graduating who is considering majoring in psychology, right? What do you say to him or her? Secondly, to universities, what do you say to the student who's, you know, 1 or 2 years into college and they've just got an offer from Domo or Instructure to go and work? What do you say to them about, do you leave your university education to go and work for a company? And to the companies, what is your ultimate goal? What would you like to see for the educational pipeline here in Utah? So love any reactions to these questions, one or two or all three of them. Michael.
Okay. All right, so I'm kind of in the middle here for a reason. To the first question, I would ask the student very seriously, you know, psychology is great, don't get me wrong, right? But this is a tech sector heavy community. So how are you going to integrate your psychology degree into technology? You know, we talked about data scientists and data analytics. A lot of those come from the humanities, and it's very important that they come from there. But, you know, I do like a liberal arts education with a strong technology skill set. To me, that's the best employee you could possibly have. And so working to change and have the student recognize that, you know, if you're in psychology, that's great, but make sure you have a technical skill set to go with it, because that then makes you employable with the communities here. To the student who's 2 years in and Domo offers them $70,000, $80,000 a year, I'm looking at them going, why are you still here? Why is this even a question? Go to work for Domo, right? But recognize that when you want to make a career, you need to finish your degree. And you need to work with Domo to understand if you like that company and you want to stay with that company, then work with their trainers, their HR, to figure out what your ultimate degree needs to be, so you're of greatest benefit to them, which makes you of greatest value, which means your pay is going to increase. And then I'll remember your third question was for the business.
Well, it's for the businesses. What's the best scenario? What could the universities, the boot camps, the state education system
I'll
be
let
doing?
them answer that one.
Okay.
I mean, I would love to see something where, you know, you look at, like you said, the boot camps, or now Pluralsight, right? Who's right here in Utah. We've lost a couple of engineers that have gone there. Interestingly enough, they could make $300,000 a year working for Pluralsight. Yep. I had a couple guys that left, said, I'm going to pay my house off in 2 years. I was like, I can't tell you don't do that, right? But how can, you know, organically the marketplace is finding a solution, right? And there's people that want to do those certificate programs. How can, you know, the educational institutions partner with those so that, you know, you can have multiple learning tracks that also lead to a degree?
Right.
I think that would be really powerful.
Yeah, and I would say that that's exactly what we're doing. We're partnering with, you know, Jeff was in a meeting with me not too long ago. We were talking about exactly that, new degree programs, what needs to be created to solve industry issues. Now, these are not, you know, training is what businesses do for their employees. Education is what we do for the masses. And it needs to be a clear understanding of that. But I do believe, and go back to what Steve brought up, the definition of education from the 1970s and 80s is not the definition of education today. And that really is where the discussion needs to start and where we really need to address this. So what you're hearing up here is really talk about 21st century education. What does it need to be? You know, how does technology, what role does technology play? If you graduate someone from a developer boot camp who's a high school kid, they go to developer boot camp, they get out there making $50,000, $60,000 a year, that's great. But that student doesn't have the writing skills. He doesn't have the communication skills. He doesn't have the team-based learning skills. So that has to be taught. And it can either be taught in an education environment to the masses, or it can be taught in a training environment specific to the individual companies.
Jeff, Teresa?
One additional thing I would add, one of the deficiencies we found as we've done our analysis from the UTC Talent Shortage Committee is the training and education of student counselors, both in the K through 12 environment and college environment. Instead of just counseling students on which courses they should take, we think they should be better educated about the employment opportunities out there. It's not just technology and software positions, even careers in, for example, welding, for example. There's a high shortage of welders in the state, composite engineers at various companies like Boeing and ATK, fabrication engineers or fabrication technicians at IM Flash. Everyone is struggling to find talent. There are a lot of opportunities out there that pay exceptionally well in the state. And if we could just educate counselors to encourage students to take courses or classes geared toward those careers, I think we'd have more success as well.
Good.
You know, one of the things you mentioned was if, you know, if a student comes to us and they, you know, they want to work most of the time they come to us and they say, can I move from being an intern to working full time? We actually try to encourage them to stay in school and say, we'll increase your hours, but you know, you're only a year away, you're only a semester away. But I had this conversation yesterday with one of my development directors that said, no, he wants to take a year off and work full time, you know, so we'll accommodate him for a year. But our preference is that they finish school. The problem is that, you know, they've already got a child, right. you know, now the wife doesn't want to work, life gets in the way, yeah. right? Which is why most people don't finish school, you know, so we try to counsel them that direction. But it's hard. They make that decision, and then, you know, as you said, then they, you know, they get 2-3 years down the road, and if they don't go back to school, then they're not promotable, right? And how do the career services in the community and the business work together, right, to help that student some way stay in school? And is it that it's back to that partnership with the online type of boot camps and Pluralsight, Newmont, whatever, so that they can continue, right?
Yeah, and I think and I think that's absolutely correct. And I think there's one other component we really haven't addressed here, and that is you have a number of stay-at-home parents that have the ability to contribute because of technology, that have an ability to contribute and contribute greatly to the community and receive significant compensation for doing that while they stay at home. And I don't think we've done a good job of reaching out to that community. And really promoting what the opportunities are as a stay-at-home parent, the flexible hours that you have, the ability you have with technology. So that's another, to me, very untapped market here in the community that we can also go after.
You know, that was one of my observations moving to Utah, and I think our untapped market are female employees, or female that have some college or even a college degree. And if you look at Ernst & Young, who's probably one of the best models of female employees being able to, you know, take time off, stay on a partner track and come back, you know, and be able to work remotely. How do we adopt some of that within the state? Encourage business to do that, where there's job sharing, working at home, you know, for that stay-at-home parent that has some degree or even a college degree. That's not been kind of the school of thought here, but with technology, it's very doable, and I think that could solve a lot of our problem. You know, it doesn't solve the problem maybe tomorrow, but if we're looking at, like you said, long-term, short-term, medium-term, right, that's going to help us solve the long-term problem for sure.
Chief?
Just a quick comment. Since we've started talking a little bit about some of the social uniqueness of Utah, we did a report in December on higher education completion strategies. And one of the things that seemed like common wisdom was that we know that it takes longer for Utah students to graduate from college. And I think most of us thought that is what's called the missionary effect. You know, people take 2 years out, some go on missions, and then it takes longer to graduate. And the longer it takes to graduate, the more will drop out because, like you said, life gets in the way. And so, but what we found out was in the statistics on how long it takes to graduate, the federal agency that tracks those statistics actually removes anybody who goes out on religious service or military service. They're not counted. And so there is no missionary effect, but what there is in Utah is the family effect. And so we do have many, many more students in Utah who are married. And those married students are more likely to have a child while they're still in school. And that is one of those things that's one of those instances of life getting in the way, and it does create more dropping out of college, especially for young Utah women, and it also does lengthen out the time that it takes to finish. And that's one of the challenges that we need to deal with, and our higher education institutions need to grapple with how to handle the alternative or the non-traditional student. And the majority of students in Utah now are non-traditional students. And that's one of the areas where the private for-profit colleges have accommodated the non-traditional student better by providing night and weekend classes, but yet you pay an arm and a leg for some of those private for-profit colleges, and some of them are not as marketable as the traditional college degrees. And so our traditional colleges need to learn some of those lessons and be better at offering night and weekend opportunities for those people who are having life get in the way of pursuing their degree.
Please, Teresa.
I just wanted to piggyback on something that Cathy had said earlier when she talked about the untapped resources of being female in the state of Utah, and totally support and agree with that. And I wanted to put a plug in for the Women's Tech Council. The WTC has what they call a She Tech. Tomorrow there are over 900 female students who are interested at the high school level who are coming to this She Tech event. It would be really awesome, and what I would like to see is where education and business continue to partner together at the high school level to get kids excited and women excited about the technical opportunities that we have, the technology opportunities that we have in the state of Utah, and to continue down this path. I mean, we've just begun, really. The three of us were on this task force, and I think we started in November. So, you know, I think we've come a long way for a couple of months, considering. But I'd also like to say I'd really like to see more businesses get involved and the educational system get involved. We were really lucky to have BYU, University of Utah, Utah State, Weber State, Salt Lake Community College, and I believe you may have been there too, when business did meet with education and asked them that same question, what can we do to partnership and work together? And I'd like to see that continue, and I think that would make a big difference here.
Okay, now where is She Tech going to be held?
It's in Orem at UVU. Sorry,
Great.
I did leave that out, I apologize.
Jeff, what's your answer to the potential psychology graduate?
I think it focuses on making sure we educate, going back to what I said earlier, the counselors who are encouraging people to go into careers where they actually can get a job and have meaningful work, meaningful opportunities.
Yeah. Chase?
Yeah, I think it's important that students know before they go. And Utah does have a tool to help support counselors. However, it has been a little bit unfunded, and it's called utahfutures.org. And utilization has actually been a little bit low national standards for deployments like this. But there are high-performing states like Louisiana and Hawaii where every high school student is using a robust exploration tool to find degrees, programs, educational opportunities that are post-secondary, as well as careers. And in Louisiana, companies like BASF and energy tech companies are actually having a profile on this page, searching in a de-identified manner for student talent, much like a baseball has a farm league system where you're identifying and recruiting talent through your own individualized pipeline, and students are vice versa also searching and exploring opportunities. So I think it's important for Utah to continue to develop a robust tool that's highly utilized, because we have a 1,000-to-1 counselor to student ratio in Utah, and so that's just simply not sustainable to give each student that personalized attention. So we need to leverage technology to show them the options and the pathways of how to get there.
We're gearing towards the end here, but Michael wants to chime in, so you'll get the last word.
I just wanted to really echo what Chase just brought up, because I do think that he's hitting one of the really key problems right on the head, and that is that the markets are changing so fast. The jobs, especially in the tech sector, are changing and evolving very quickly that, you know, like I said, I'm a dean of a college of technology and computing. I have a 17-year-old right now who's fixing to graduate high school and go to college, and so she started her college searches. Well, she's a junior, so she started her college searches and stuff, and it's overwhelming for me to be able to go through this with her, and she's just completely lost. And so what we're seeing is that the parents and the students don't really know what the market is. They really don't, and they don't know what potential jobs are out there. They don't know what degrees are related to those jobs. And that, to me, is one of the fundamental problems we have. And, you know, we have to fix that. And so, you know, kudos to Chase and Graduation Alliance and some of the, I saw the tool that they're using. I grew up in Louisiana. I have family there, and have talked to them about, you know, the tools that are being used and stuff. We're using a similar one in Texas. Utah has to do that, because otherwise these students really are only going to know, hey, I know my guidance counselor has a degree in psychology, so guess what? I'm going to go to psychology because I really like my guidance counselor. We have got to broaden that array, and we really have to introduce the full spectrum of degrees and programs and job opportunities that are out there, so students and their parents can make informed decisions.
Well, we started the discussion by talking about some of the educational needs of the technology industry, but I think we've definitely explored the fact that education itself is changing due to technology and needs to adapt to the needs of current employers. We appreciate everyone being here. We want to call your attention to our next event on April 9th, Protecting the Mountains, Enhancing Outdoor Recreation, and encourage you to sign up for and share information about our events on utahbreakfast.com. And before we conclude, I just want to ask you to join me in thanking our sponsors, Utah Foundation and Beehive Startups, and as well as our panelists, Stephen, Cathy, Michael, Teresa, Jeff, and Chase, and each of you for joining us here today. So please join me in thanking them.